As governor, I signed one of the biggest packages of pro-worker policies in history, making it easier for workers to form unions, strengthening worker protections, and banning captive audience meetings.
Something else that happened last week was the International Association of Firefighters had their national convention, at which the vice presidential nominees of both major parties spoke, actually. So this is a real interesting opportunity to take a listen to the pitches that both make, especially, and both candidates make a case for them being the more pro-worker team, right? And so there's a funny bit from Vance's speech that we'll play and we'll listen to, but after that, I really want to compare the substance of Vance's pitch about being pro-worker to Walz's, and I'll see if folks can kind of find the difference. So first, let's start off with Vance, his pitch to the International Association of Firefighters, the union of firefighters, the biggest union of firefighters in the United States, on why they are so pro-worker, him and Trump. Let's listen to that.
Now, President Trump and I are proud to be the most pro-worker Republican ticket in history, and I want to talk about why we're fighting for working people, why we're going to fight for unions and non-union alike. Now, our enemies and a lot of Democrats call us populists, like it's something of an insult. But if being a populist means being on the side of working people rather than the powerful elites who hollowed out our middle class and sent us into stupid foreign wars, then sign me up. I am a populist, and I'm proud of it. For decades, unions have given support to Democrat candidates without giving Republicans much consideration, and I'm not here to judge you or to blame you or to criticize you. I am here to tell you that it's a different world now. You may have noticed that Donald Trump is not exactly like Mitt Romney or some of the Republicans of the past. He is a different kind of Republican. And under his leadership, the Republican Party is the party of the American worker. Now just think about the Republican and Democrat conventions we just had. It says a lot who each party chose to put up on that stage. At the Republican convention, we were featuring everyday American workers, and of course, we had Hulk Hogan. And while it's tempting, and I'm sure it would make some big headlines, don't worry, everybody, I'm not going to try to take off my shirt here. But at the Democrat convention, it was a parade of celebrities and billionaires. It felt sometimes like every celebrity except for Hulk Hogan was at the Democratic National Convention. And I don't blame anybody for being famous or for making money, but you cannot be a champagne socialist who supports open borders and pretend that you're a friend of working men and women. It doesn't make an ounce of sense, my friends. It just doesn't.
And so there you go. You see him being booed, saying that he was that they were the most pro-worker Republican ticket in history, which is not true. Which is just not true. You know, if you take a look at Wendell Willkie, for instance, who ran against FDR, his pitch for running against FDR was that for some reason the person who passed Social Security and the National Labor Relations Act wasn't actually going to protect it, but Wendell Willkie, the Republican nominee for president, was really going. I'm going to do Social Security so hard. You know, that was his pitch, right? So obviously, no.
You can go back to the 50s and the Eisenhower Republican era platform that, certainly was more pro-labor than Republicans today. You could go back to the radical Republicans of the Civil War era, who literally fought against slavery.
Right.
Pretty bad for working people. Slavery is. But, people are loving these grand historical comparisons these days.
And so the one thing that he points to in his he points to a couple of things in his juxtaposition and trying to make the case that we're the more pro-worker ticket. And that was that look at the people who were at the DNC. So this is just like rhetoric and comparing people, which was super weird because, like, famously, the Republican national convention had one union leader. Like that was like a big story that Sean O'Brien spoke at the RNC. That was huge. And there wasn't anybody else, really. I think that he was introduced by a local president of like a plumbers union or something. Which is fine, and that's all fine and good, right? But one or two. Whereas the Democratic convention had half a dozen or more presidents of international unions and then others on the stage. The president of my national union gave the invocation for the final night. It's just like not the same at all. So it's really weird to compare kind of the speeches of each of these conventions, if you want to make the case that you're more pro-worker. But then the other thing, there is I kind of hesitate to say substantive kind of comparison, but he says, they support open borders and we don't, and that makes us more pro-worker, right? And so there's a policy kind of hint there.
Democrats don't support open borders.
Exactly. Obviously, Democrats
they don't. Like, I'm sorry. I understand that people want you to believe that. I understand that there are idiots on Facebook who repeat this every day, but Democrats do not support open borders.
Right.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Show me where they're doing this. The last I checked, Kamala Harris was pushing for border policies that are in some ways as far right as Donald Trump from 2016. If you talk to immigration advocates, right, they're not. Talk to anyone who actually follows immigration seriously. And they can point you to the lies behind that. And that is even separate from the fact that you want us to believe that the border issue is somehow the defining issue for working people.
Right.
As if there are open borders, which there aren't, and as if that is the crisis facing working people, which it's not.
Right.
So,
and that's we talked about, there was a debate that Sohrab Ahmari and Hamilton Nolan had on, what is it, Behind the News or something, with Doug Henwood, about this, and how, Hamilton Nolan pointed out that anytime a conservative or Republican goes on about how they're so pro-worker, the only policies that they point to are trade and immigration. And so Vance, again, living up to exactly the kind of stuff that we see there from pro-worker, quote-unquote, conservatives and Republicans. And so let's take a listen now.
But before you do that, though, I do want to say, like, I get what he's doing because I understand some of the shtick is going to resonate, because I'm also against the stupid foreign wars that he referenced.
Right.
I'm also against the billionaires and celebrities at the DNC that he referenced. That's... so I see what he's doing, and it's easy to make those comments now, meaningly, when they don't really mean anything,
right?
Just as an aside, as part of your rhetoric. But it's just rhetoric. It's just rhetoric.
Yeah,
and it doesn't actually cover any of the substance, because if you want my life to be worse in pretty much every way imaginable, but, oh, by the way, you're going to make some immigrant's life even worse?
Even worse, yeah.
Oh, that's supposed to, plug me in?
Right.
Sorry, I don't see it. I don't see how that is relevant to working people. If you want billionaires to be richer, if you want my boss to have more power and more money, you want there to be less regulations on my bosses, right? You want them to have more power and more wealth at my expense.
Mm-hmm.
But you're supposed to be appealing to me.
Right. Yeah, and then even on the trade and the outsourcing stuff, let's actually look at Donald Trump's record. His final year in office, right here in Gadsden, Alabama, a Goodyear plant that employed hundreds of workers closed and outsourced their production to Mexico. In Alabama, one of the most Trump voting states in the country, he allowed hundreds of jobs to move to Mexico without so much as a tweet from Donald Trump, despite the best efforts of the United Steelworkers to appeal to the Trump administration. Right? And so it's just so, it's Like, it's just so gross. It's so frustrating. And so let's listen to Walz and like take a listen. Actually, like the stuff that he says, the things that he says as a supporting argument for why his ticket is pro-worker. And I think the things that Walz points out versus the thing that Vance points out, I think just kind of the type of thing that each person is pointing to is interesting. So let's listen to Tim Walz.
Look, this is the time of year that talk is cheap. But that's why Vice President Harris is proudly part of the most pro-labor administration in history, unafraid to walk picket lines with workers demanding better pay and conditions. And that's why she rescued pensions of more than 1 million of our union sisters and brothers, workers and retirees, and insisted that prevailing wage jobs spring from federal investments. It's your construction brothers and sisters know that one. It's that same spirit that animated my fight for labor in Minnesota. As governor, I signed one of the biggest packages of pro-worker policies in history into law, making it easier for workers to form unions, strengthening worker protections, and banning captive audience meetings. Today, Minnesota is one of the best states for workers in the nation. And guess what? It's one of the best states for business. You don't have to choose between protecting workers and protecting business. They go hand in hand. That's Vice President's and my vision for the entire country. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, they have something a little different in mind. The only thing these guys know about working people is how to take advantage of them, how to not pay them. Every single chance they've gotten, they've waged a war on workers and the ability to collectively bargain. When it comes to so-called right-to-work laws that deprive unions of funds they need, Donald Trump has said he supports right to work 100%. Everybody in this room knows right to work means right to work for less, right to work more dangerously, right to work for no pensions. It doesn't mean the ability to collectively bargain to fight with the dignity that work brings to each and every one of us.
So there you go. You know, just in that little, and you know, he talks about more stuff in the rest of his speech, and JD Vance talks about more stuff in the rest of his speech. And in Vance's speech, there was, you know, a really nice kind of human moment about how, you know, a firefighter saved his mom's life, and how, you know, sometimes it can be hard for a firefighter to maybe know or realize that they're making a difference. And so, you know, he kind of points to himself as, you know, there are lots of people like me that got a second chance, and because of you and the work you do in that. And that was all really nice. But, you know, I'm not going to include that because it's not, you know, not really super relevant, but it worth noting, I guess. But, you know, in that little bit where Walz is specifically kind of zeroing in on why we are pro-worker, quote unquote, this is their case, he mentions like half a dozen policies, right? He says, we're going to walk picket lines. We have walked picket lines. We saved pensions of 1 million union members, Butch Lewis, which no Republican voted for, remember. We support prevailing wage. We do not support right to work. In Minnesota, I made it easier to organize. I strengthened worker protections. I banned captive audience meetings. And our Republican opponents support right to work. And so, you know, instead of like, he doesn't even go to, which he would even have more of a leg to stand on if he did the whole line about look who was at the DNC versus who was at the RNC, right? He would have more of a leg to stand on because actually there were more worker leaders at the DNC. But there was a lot of policy there. And I think that's interesting that the case that, you know, that Vance tried to make to these firefighters was around rhetoric and looks, where Walz was around policy and substance. And I think that's, you know, that's worth taking note of.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.